Hello everybody and welcome back to another Pokemon tier list presented by the Game House. I'm Rob and I'll be taking you through today's tier list. We're going to be looking at middle Pokemon. You know, the Pokemon that everybody seems to forget about, the middle child. For you guys and for these Pokemon, we think they have some great designs and a few other criteria that I'm going to be giving you guys as soon as you make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our Pokemon content that's coming out on a daily basis. And we even have these tier lists coming out every single Saturday. So make sure you do that so that you're not missing out. And I'm going to ask you before we dive in as well, let me know in the comments section below not only what you think of this tier list, but if you have an idea for another tier list that you would like for us to try, we'll definitely give it a look. So make sure to let us know. But let's move on now to the different criteria for these Pokemon. There are going to be a few things on this criteria list, and the first one is going to be just the general looks, right? There are Pokemon that have better looks, and yes, a lot of this will be personal preference, which is why I'm expecting many potentially unkind or disagreeing comments, and that's fine. You know, I can take that all in stride, no worries there, but design is going to be really important for us. It's also going to be looking at how well it fits into the rest of the evolution line. The starters are always so important. The final evolutions are really important. And getting to that point, finding that middle evolution is really important and something that we're going to strongly consider. And then also it's just going to be based on the other middle Pokemon in this tier list. Some of them are just generally better than others, and we're not talking about stats. You guys will see it's going to be scrolling past me probably right about now, depending on when the editor does this, but the stats are generally about the same. For the most part, the first few generations are, you know, a 405, I believe, is the, you know, combined stats. And then later on, they seemingly added some stats and then went back, and a couple of them are 420, a couple of them are 410. There's just a lot of different variations, and they're not necessarily consistent. The one thing they are mostly consistent with is that the middle evolution in each generation is about the same. It's really only the final evolutions that have a major change there. So we decided to kind of throw that out, as it was not really much of a difference. A 10 or a 15 point stat boost is really all that we were seeing when looking through these. And it just didn't feel like it was relevant enough to have an effect on this tier list. So we hope you guys understand. But with that, it's time to rank some Pokemon. The first one is going to be Ivysaur, and Ivysaur is a really solid Pokemon. You can see not only how the design works within the evolution, how the bulb is getting ready to flower and blossom when it turns into Ivysaur, but the transition from Bulbasaur to Ivysaur feels very practical, very easy to make that distinction for it. You're not really questioning anything about it, and it's just a cool Pokemon. A lot of people love Bulbasaur, and this felt like a very natural sort of evolution for this, and because of it, we're going to be putting it here in the A tier. Moving on, we are going to be looking at Charmeleon. Charmeleon by itself is actually a really interesting Pokemon. It could have been its own line almost, it feels like. The interesting thing is this one feels the most like a teenager, if you want to put it that way, in their middle years-ish, based on the way that they do evolutions, you know, evolving at 16 or 18, right? And I think that was always the look they were trying to go for. And Charmeleon is a really cool looking Pokemon, and you can imagine what Charmander and Charizard might have looked like if they were red. That is the big hang-up I have on this, even though I absolutely love Charmeleon. Of the original Pokemon, this one feels the least, I guess, the least fitting in with the rest of its evolutionary line. And it's not because it doesn't look like an okay progression between Charizard and Charmander. The color really throws it off here. That being said, the design is still pretty solid, and it's pretty obvious what you're going to be getting, and it doesn't feel like it stands out enough to be its own Pokemon, so we're going to be putting it here in the B tier. After that, it's Wartortle, and Wartortle is interesting as well because it almost feels like a final evolution in itself. It makes sense, again, with the progression between Squirtle, Wartortle, and Blastoise, but the wings on its head and the way that its tail is compared to the way that we end up getting Blastoise, and maybe this is more of kind of a critique of the way that Blastoise ended up. You know, Blastoise ends up having just those normal cat-like ears that they do with a lot of Pokemon, and the tail ends up turning into something very small. We end up getting, you know, the big water guns on the side of it, but the thing is that Wartortle is a really cool-looking Pokemon. It's got a great name as well, which I should have said is something we are considering in this tier list as well, and it's not a bad look whatsoever, but it does stand out a little bit much. It's pretty obvious that it's part of the Squirtle line, right? And most of these Pokemon, it's going to be pretty obvious that they're part of their line. But this one really feels like if they had changed a couple things, they could have convinced you that this was a Pokemon all on its own. And because of that, similarly to Charmeleon, we're going to be putting it here in the B tier. Next up is going to be Bayleef, a really interesting Pokemon. Chikorita is not particularly loved. Meganium as well is not necessarily a Pokemon that most people are picking. When you have Cyndaquil and Totodile, there's always going to be that one Pokemon that's not going to be as loved in the generations other than really like Generation 1. And unfortunately, it falls to Bayleef. The design isn't bad. It's not great. You could see where they are going with this Pokemon, and it is an interesting name as well, as it feels like it fits okay between Chikorita and Meganium, but the problem is that it's kind of bland, to be honest with you, and maybe that's the entire problem with the Chikorita line. It's potentially the best part of this line, but that's not saying a whole lot, and it pains us, but, well, it pains me specifically to have to put it down here in the F tier as our first F tier middle Pokemon. There are a lot of worse Pokemon out there, design-wise, everything-wise, but Bayleef just doesn't really do it for me, and it's just going to have to be our first one in F tier when compared to everything else. Now we've got Quilava, which is a really great name. Cyndaquil, Quilava, and Typhlosion are arguably some of the best starters. There's a reason why they were chosen for Pokemon Legends Arceus. There are some people I've heard recently, I'd never heard this growing up or even up until the last few months, that apparently didn't love Cyndaquil and Typhlosion. I really don't know why, outside of the weird, you know, Typhlosion lore that ended up being fake from the Terra leaks. Depending on when you watch this video, that may be very front of mind for you, but Quilava is an awesome design. The color scheme works really well. The blue and the orange and the yellow and reds all really mix well. You can feel what kind of Pokemon this is, and it's almost the perfect middle stage to where it's got a little bit more of an attitude, right? Cyndaquil is very calm demeanor, right? And then you get into this middle stage where it's starting to kind of heat up. It's got its fire mohawk and, you know, its fire frill on its butt, and then you get into Typhlosion where, you know, it's got the ring of fire around it. It's a very active, like very aggressive looking Pokemon. It fits super well, and let's be honest, it's also got a great moveset. I said I wasn't going to really consider that, and I'm not going to, but it's something that I always remembered about it when I picked it for my teams in the past. It's a shame that we don't actually get it for longer because it feels like such a fun Pokemon to have in your lineup, and along with the design and the numerous other reasons, this is going to be our first S tier middle evolution Pokemon, which may really make a lot of people upset at this point. Now we've got Croconaw up, and Croconaw is interesting because it gives you this weird vibe of like a crocodile mixed with a caveman, and there's just something weirdly great about it. The only problem is that for some reason, this Pokemon also has a mohawk with it, which it takes away a little bit. And then, honestly, even growing up, I didn't recognize that it had this spine on its tail as well. This one really does seem to work, though. The jaw's getting bigger. The, Totodile goes from this, seemingly, I don't know, normal-ish looking alligator to like more of like a, giving us that understanding that Feraligatr is going to be more of like a prehistoric type Pokemon. Like, most of the rest of these, this obviously Meganium is a dinosaur, but Croconaw is a cool Pokemon, and its coloring works really well together. The design works well. It feels like it's very often overlooked, and because of that, we're going to be putting it here in the A tier, just below Ivysaur. We're on the Gen 3 now at this point, and we're going to be taking a look here at Grovyle, a Pokemon that's, well, super fun to say the least. One that I think a lot of people really enjoy. Sceptile, however you want to say it, is great in the anime. Obviously, Grovyle does a lot for Ash. It's a really good Pokemon overall, and it's one that I should say, I am surprised does not get even more love. I was kind of just looking around the internet, seeing what other people were feeling about this one, and it's generally the same feelings that I have. Grovyle is such an awesome design. The fact that, the leaves on its arms turn into a scythe, essentially, it, shows off Leaf Blade very well in the anime, and the stealth tactics of it, just the vibe, the coloring as well is incredible on it. There's not a lot of bad things to say, as it works its way from Trico all the way to Sceptile. So I think this Pokemon is fantastic, and I think it's another S tier, and I'm actually going to put it above Quilava, as it's going to be heading up this list at the very top at this point. Now, I'm just realizing that for some reason they don't have Marshtomp in here. I don't know why. I believe every other Pokemon is in here for the middle evolutions, but I guess Marshtomp got kind of forgotten about, which is interesting. I will either, have the editors make sure to put it in the video, or I'll, write it in somewhere. But Marshtomp, in case if you forgot, really does a good job of going between Mudkip and Swampert. The orange and blue design is really good. And the derpy nature of Mudkip carries over to Marshtomp very well. That being said, it is a generally forgettable Pokemon. Getting the water ground typing isn't the best as well, and it's a good Pokemon, don't get me wrong, and it does a good job of being in the middle, but there's just something about Marshtomp that leaves you wanting a little bit more. It's not a bad Pokemon, without a doubt. It's a solid middle evolution. If you really are into derpy Pokemon, then this is probably S tier. But for me, I'm going to be ending up putting it in the C tier as the very first C tier Pokemon for us. Now we're on to, again, the ones back, I should say, that we have on the actual screen. We're going with Combusken here. And everybody knows that Blaziken is awesome. Torchic is really adorable as well. One of the things I know, I'm doing a playthrough as of the recording of this episode of Emerald Sea Glass, and I have a Combusken. The moveset on Combusken is absolutely broken. Having a flying move, 2 different fire moves, and double kick just makes it really solid. It does a good job getting itself into the Blaziken world. The only problem is that it just feels, again, just a little bit lacking. It's not that it's doing a bad job, but it feels like they could have done a little bit more in terms of getting it ready to be a fighting Pokemon. If it didn't have this stance that's being shown to us, it would just kind of look like a fire, chick Pokemon, which I guess to a certain degree, obviously, that's what Torchic is, but it doesn't seem to, doesn't seem to go far enough towards getting you ready for Blaziken, in my opinion. It's not a poorly designed Pokemon, without a doubt, but it's just not one of my favorites. I'm very much looking forward to Blaziken by the time that I get this Combusken, and I'm not really, caring all that much necessarily between Torchic and Blaziken, and because of that, it's going to be at the top of this C tier list. We're into Gen 4 now, and we're going to be starting with Grotle. And guys, look, it's It's tough because Turtwig is really cute. Grotle looks okay at best. And then Torterra, it just kind of depends on you guys. Maybe I'll do a final evolution tier list here at some point, but I'm just not a huge fan of Grotle. I don't understand the armor aesthetic that comes to this and then doesn't really go with Torterra. I know that they have shells, obviously, you know, but this one extends through the body and then it, I guess, is going to disappear. It's got, you know, the beginnings of the plants growing on its back, but even still, it just doesn't feel like a great design of a Pokemon. It looks a little too bland for me, and there are parts of it that are confusing as it doesn't feel like it's building into Torterra very well. Because of that, I am going to be putting it down here at the bottom of F tier, and it may end up staying there by itself. We will have to see. We also have Monferno up here at this point, and this one's going to be another very controversial one for us, you know, for you guys, I should say, by me. And Monferno isn't a bad Pokemon. It's a solid Pokemon. It's, you know, continued doing the whole, you know, fire and fighting type movesets. It was great, but Infernape is just so superior. Chimchar's just a lot cuter, and look, maybe it's just getting the middle child syndrome, you know, and people are gonna judge it for that. I don't know. I just don't think there are a lot of other fire Pokemon on here that are better, in my opinion. It fits the aesthetic pretty well, though, and because of that, it's gonna, you know, make its way up into the top of B tier. Now we got Prinplup. Look, Piplup into Empoleon. It's so hard to stand out between those two, but I think that there are very few middle evolution Pokemon that do a better job of truly transitioning between the two based on what we end up getting, right? You even have the frills that turn into the anchor type looking thing on the top of Empoleon. You can see that its wings are turning into the swords that Empoleon's gonna have. Even, you know, the different designs that are on its stomach work well. It stands out in a good way in terms of the coloring, works really nicely with it. It's unfortunate that they couldn't do a tiny bit more with it, but overall it's a really solid evolution, and it sets up the Empoleon evolution extremely well. Because of this, I'm going to end up putting it down up here right above Croconaw. I was going to put it down and I was like, you know what? I think I'm feeling it a little bit more than Croconaw, so it's going to get to stay right there. Here comes Gen 5, and Servine is getting us started off, and I personally am 50-50 on Servine, to be honest with you. There are times when it looks really cool, and there are times when I'm like, The little legs at the bottom and the hands just kind of ruin this Pokemon for me. I understand that maybe there were, you know, some... they're getting you to the whole superior snake vibe, right? It's just that they really probably just should have gotten rid of it completely. It just doesn't work very well with the design, but the head and the rest of Servine are fantastic. They're a really cool looking design, and this Pokemon does a pretty solid job, I would say, almost to its own detriment, of getting you from Snivy to Superior. There are parts of me at times that almost wonder why they didn't make Snivy from the very start just a snake. The fact that, you know, it has legs and arms just doesn't really work for me, and truth be told, Servine does look a little cooler than Snivy, even though I really like Snivy, but at the same time, I think it's missing some very important features or, you know, some additional things. They ended up putting the spines with the little leaves here, which were not on Snivy at all, and they don't end up really being on... Well, I guess maybe they do end up being on Superior now that I'm looking at it over here on the right. A little bit more at the very tail, but it almost just feels like that's more of just the tail, which has always had a leaf, so that's what I'm saying. It's a cool looking middle design, but at the same time, it just feels unnecessary. I don't know. This one was confusing for me in terms of where I wanted to put it because I just love This portion right through here, if you guys could see my mouse, this portion is fantastic. The rest of this Pokemon I really struggle with. Because of that, though, I am going to put it at the top of C tier. I'm not going to let it go any lower than that. This saving Servine in a very big way. Up next is Pignite, and let's be honest here, guys. Tepig, Emboar, Pignite, all of them, they are not at the top of nearly anybody's list. I believe I went to Ranker before this as well when I was doing my research, and I think Ranker had this entire line very at or near the bottom. It makes me wonder if we will be getting some sort of new evolution for this line to give it a little bit of justice. It's just that the wrestling portion of this Pokemon doesn't really work well for me. I also, Unova, it's supposed to be based on, New York off the United States, and why they picked a wrestler pig Pokemon was really confusing to me. I will be honest with you. I think that Pignite might be one of the better parts of the entire Tepig, evolution line for me. That being said, it's still not great. It fits its aesthetic well, but it's not an aesthetic that a lot of people really like, including myself. I don't want to hate on this Pokemon entirely, though. I think it's better than Bayleef and Grotle, so it'll go at the top of F tier for me. And the last one in Gen 5 is going to be Dewott, which is also interesting to me just because Dewott does a good job of getting you ready to be Samurott, right? But I actually also struggle with Samurott because I don't understand, it's supposed to be like a samurai, but it doesn't really feel or look like one. And again, Unova, I love Unova, to be clear. I think Black and White and Black and White 2 are some of the best Pokemon games out there. But if I'm being honest with you, this Pokemon just doesn't do a lot for me. It's an interesting design. I get that, it uses Razor Shell, right? That's supposed to be kind of like its sword. But I guess I'm just struggling with understanding why they decided that this Pokemon would kind of be what it was. I like the idea of an otter, but it just doesn't... I struggle seeing how it gets to Samurott, especially based on kind of the way that Dewott and Oshawott seem to work so well together. So this may still be like another one of those, it's more of a final evolution problem for me, but Dewott's not terrible, it's just not great. I am going to put it right above Pignite here in the F tier. Kalos is up next, Gen 6, and that's where we'll be heading for Legends ZA. At the time, again, that this is coming out, Legends ZA has not been released. We don't know who the starter Pokemon are for that. I'm going to be really interested to see how all of that goes down. But Quilladin, I believe, I want to make sure that I don't mess this up. I'm scrolling to make sure. Yes, it's Quilladin. That's right. It's such a goofy looking Pokemon. And just because of that, it makes me laugh. I think the entire Chespin line gets way too much hate, personally. I think that Chespin's cool. I think Chestnut is also a really cool Pokemon. I think Quilladin is by far and away the worst part of this line, and it doesn't necessarily do a great job of getting you to Chestnut, but it works well with Chespin. It's just such a goofy little guy, and the fact that it might be one of the most goofy, lovable looking Pokemon on this list makes it interesting to me. And this will probably be a little bit of an upset for a lot of people, but I just love the little face. I can't get over it. It's going to go at the very bottom of B tier. It's not much better than the C tier Pokemon for me right now, guys, or just in general, but I want to show it some love. I think it deserves that, and I do think that it fits really well with Chespin. Again, I struggle a little bit with the whole Chestnut part of it, but I think that there's a real world where this Pokemon, with a few little, just maybe one or two little design changes, getting rid of the, I think, pink on it would probably do a lot, but they needed the pink to maybe make it stand out a little bit more. Regardless, it's our little ball boy, and it's going to go there at B. Next up is Braixen. I can't remember exactly how to pronounce it, but I think that this Pokemon is really, really good, to be honest with you. The design for this is fantastic. You can see where it goes from the Fennekin into being Delphox. It's got its wand in its tail right now, which is fantastic. It keeps the fox aesthetic very, perfectly, I would say, throughout it. Even the weird orange ear hair that's in this line works really well. It's an awesome Pokemon. It's one that was very memorable for me when I was doing my first playthrough or I guess it would be my second playthrough of Pokemon X and Y. Spoiler alert, I ended up picking Chespin because I thought he was really cute. But regardless, these are some of the better starter lines in the later generations for me, and I just think Braixen's a really cool Pokemon, so I'm going to be putting it here at A tier. I'm going to put it just above Prinplup, and, now we're going to head into Greninja territory, Froakie territory, truly Pokemon that are like royalty in the starter community, and I get it. Frogadier is a cool-looking Pokemon. It gives you the ninja vibes. You start to see the cloud, the bubble, right, which is going to ultimately turn into Greninja's Scarf Tongue. You've got the ears, or I guess the wings of the ears, like right above the eyes, that will turn into Greninja's, iconic winged, head look. The change in terms of the coloring, which I've talked about a lot, but when you look at Froakie, right, it goes from this light blue, Greninja's a dark blue, you get a little bit of the mixture of both, and you can really see where it is going. It's a really good looking Pokemon. It's probably one of my all-time favorites, and if I'm being honest with you guys, we need a water Pokemon up here in the S tier, and I think that Frogadier deserves it. I don't think it's going to go higher than Quilava or than Grovyle, but I do think that Frogadier is just a fantastic Pokemon, and it deserves to be up here in the S tier. We're going sailing, and we're heading over to the islands of Alola now, and we're heading into another great starter Pokemon trio for a lot of people. Litten is, I think, generally beloved. Incineroar, I don't know so much. And I guess I'm unintentionally going to be skipping. We'll start, I guess, with Torracat. And, oh man, I don't know if this one's going to be controversial or not. Weirdly enough, Sun and Moon are the games that I have a lot of struggle getting through personally. They're probably down there near some of my least favorite Pokemon games. I know a lot of people love them because it got a lot of people really back into Pokemon. There's always that generation somewhere that I think is very polarizing for a lot of people, and this is one of them for me. There's a very specific Pokemon that I really like for the starters, and it's not Litten. I don't love Torracat. I don't understand how they went from these very genuinely cat-looking Pokemon to a wrestler again in Incineroar. Torracat fits very well with Litten, but I guess it's, tag here goes into being Incineroar's belt. I just don't know. I don't think it's very good. I don't mind the look of it by itself. I think the black and red work really well with it, but the line gets really weird after it, and it's just a super forgettable Pokemon, to be honest with you. But I don't know. I really struggled with where to put this one just because I don't hate the design of it necessarily, so I ended up putting it above Pignite. I'm recording this as I'm doing this, but I had already made a tier list before this that I'm referencing, so that's what I am talking about. But I think it's just below Dewott. Maybe I'll move Dewott up. I think I'm going to do that. I'm just going to move Dewott up just a little bit because I think it deserves to be up here in the C tier. I got rid of the D tier, by the way. I think, once you get past C, you're just, basically have an F anyway. So, yeah, Torracat, not my favorite. Yeah. Now we got Dartrix. This Pokemon is awesome to me. I love the emo hair of it. I think the design is fantastic. I love that they kept the bow tie throughout this Pokemon. I think if you ask most people, Rowlet is the favorite in this entire line of Sun and Moon. I would argue it might be my favorite like line of Pokemon in all of Sun and Moon as a whole, not just as the starters. I really think Dartrix is a fantastic design. I think it leads perfectly into Decidueye, right? You go from this very proper, you know, Rowlet Pokemon, you know, with its bow tie, into the Dartrix that's like kind of emo and, I don't know, being a teenager, right? And then you get to Decidueye, who's this rebel Robin Hood. I can totally see the progression just in terms of personality and the look of the Pokemon, you know, the bow turning into its cape, and then, you know, it having a bow itself, using its feathers for its attacks. It's a fantastic design to me. One of my favorites, and it was an instant S tier for me. Not above Frogadier, I will say, or Quilava or Grovyle, but it's one of the best, I think, overall middle designs out there. Now we have Brionne and Brionne. I don't love this line. I don't know why. I just am not a fan of this line whatsoever. It's strange to me just because I don't love, I think, the kind of clown-like aspect of it. I know that they're trying to do, like, you know, the juggling of balls as a seal and everything, and then you get into this Pokemon that's wearing, you know, it takes the frill at the top into a sort of dress look, into the Primarina, which becomes kind of, you know, the opera singer type Pokemon. It's all about the theater, a little bit too much of the clown aspect of it. And I think a lot of people are going to dislike me for saying this, but I think it's the nose that kind of ruins it for me. It just feels out of place with this Pokemon line. It's not that this line is bad, to be clear. It's really not. It's not a bad line of Pokemon in terms of its design. I can see how they got from, you know, step 1 to step 3, from the Popplio to the Primarina, but there's just something about it that it leaves me wanting more. And I think taking out the nose would really help, or just changing it up a little bit. It makes it cute. It's okay, but I will be honest with you. I just don't love it. And it's going to go down here in the F tier. I'm going to put it just below Torracat. I'm sorry. Maybe it's just that I don't really love the Sun and Moon games, but you can see kind of where my feelings are. There are great parts to Sun and Moon, and there are really bad parts to Sun and Moon. Maybe this is kind of a microcosm of my feelings for it. So, yeah, let's just move on, because I don't want to make any more people upset. We're getting down to our last 2 generations, and this one we're going to Galar. And we got Thwackey here. Grookey Gang was a really big deal when this game came out, and people were trying to decide, you know, which Pokemon that they would want. And Thwackey is a very forgettable Pokemon for me, right? I think the middle evolutions, sometimes that's kind of the point. And it's not that you want them to stand out necessarily on their own, and you could see how Grookey got to Thwackey, got to Rillaboom. I think the name specifically for Thwackey really helps you get into and get ready for Rillaboom. You know, he's got, you know, kind of the wristbands on. You know, he kind of looks like he's a punk rocker. Even just the demeanor, the way that they have, you know, him crossing his arms in this picture, or them crossing their arms in this picture. And it's just, it's an okay design. I loved Grookey, but I thought that it got worse throughout. I don't really love Rillaboom. Rillaboom's okay. Thwackey's alright. I really like the green and the orange, the different greens, I should say, and the brown. Like, I think that that's a really cool looking combination, but it's similar to what we got like with Quilladin, and I was split on this one, but I will say that I ended up putting it above Dewott here in the C tier. And we're going to head instead into, so I don't, again, make any more people upset, into the Scorbunny, Raboot, and Cinderace line. And if you know anything about me, I love this line. I love it. I don't know that it necessarily makes a ton of sense at times, just in terms of, I think maybe the outfit choice for Raboot was a little different, but at the same time, I understand, obviously, the whole soccer/football aesthetic of it, the whole theme surrounding it. It's got the headband. It's got, you know, like I think the pants with the shoes that are ready to kick a soccer ball. I don't know if maybe there's like a shirt or some sort of design in the UK specifically, since that's where these games are based, that Raboot is kind of matching that aesthetic, but I don't know if I really care. I love Raboot. I think it's an awesome looking Pokemon. I think it does do a good job of continuing that soccer aesthetic. It does, to me, look like a teenager with its hair, you know, kind of thrown back like it is, with the headband on. It really fits the soccer portion of it, and I just think it's a great Pokemon in general. As I said, it fits its middle evolution perfectly, and Raboot is going to go right here below Dartrix for me. It's a great Pokemon. I'm not going to complain. Now we've got Drizzile, which is, I don't know, man. The Sobble line is intriguing. Inteleon is an interesting Pokemon. Sobble is an interesting Pokemon. Drizzile is, well, they took the emo aesthetic from Dartrix and brought it back, but I don't think they did a very good job with it, to be honest with you. I just think there's so much left there. It really feels like one of the most basic-ish designs. Like, they gave, obviously, Drizzile a little bit more of a personality than, like, obviously, like, Ivysaur, Charmeleon, and Wartortle. They all have this scowl, right? They all are trying to look tough. I don't know. Drizzile's, you know, given the, you know, thumbs down. Like, I could see it, but I just don't think... I think it's more that maybe there should have been more done with the hair aspect. Like, it just feels pretty bare. It just feels like there's something missing. And because of that, it's going to go down here in the F tier. I'm going to actually even put it behind... I think I'm going to put it behind Bayleef. I just don't love it. It just feels too simple, not enough. And it does, like, I know Inteleon has, like, the cool Pokemon thing where, you know, it goes from a Sobble being a little scared to Drizzile being a little bit of a rebel and, you know, putting its thumb down to the cool secret agent Inteleon. But outside of the design flowing well, I don't know that personality, you know, kind of mindset that they had with this works for me. So we're going to move on to Gen 9, going to Scarlet and Violet, and Crocalor is going to be the very first one on this list here. And Crocalor is hilarious just because it has a sombrero. I know that this is, you know, supposed to be set in Spain and everything, but I don't understand how you go from Fuecoco's little hair to the egg-looking sombrero on Crocalor's head to Skeledirge. Like, I guess maybe it's the Day of the Dead type thing, and maybe I'm missing something in terms of Spanish culture with that. Like, but it just feels like they threw it in there because of the Spanish culture, not as much because it flowed as well with the Pokemon. I think they could have done something a little different with Crocalor, where, you know, when you look at Skeledirge, right, the flames are coming out of its mouth and going around its head, right? You know what I'm just realizing, guys? I'm going to scrap all this. I don't know how I've never noticed this before, but Skeledirge has like a little bird Pokemon and it hatches into a nest on its head. Okay, I guess I see that, but I still don't... I don't understand why. I'm seeing it now for the first time. I didn't have a Skeledirge in my playthrough. I was a weird person and went with Quaxwell. So... I guess I'll take that back a little bit, but it still doesn't make a ton of sense to me. There must be something in Spanish lore that I just don't know or don't understand about it. I get the Day of the Dead thing with the skull that's on all of these Pokemon, but it's too derpy for me. I don't hate it. It's an interesting design, but I don't love it. And I'm putting it down here at C tier, and I hope I don't get flamed too much for just figuring that other part out. We got two more. We got Floragato up next, and Floragato, a lot of people were upset. I remember Sprigatito was like, everybody's like, oh, they're going to finally have another, you know, Pokemon that's on all four legs. Like, this is fantastic. Nope, they got it right out of the way in the middle evolution instead of just in the final evolution like they did with Torracat, which I think was part of the reason why Incineroar wasn't loved so much, but... Floragato works perfectly from Sprigatito to Meowscarada. It's one of the, I think Pokemon that fit perfectly, you know, they are, the design of the mask is coming up and getting darker and creeping over onto the face. The whole, you know, rose flower in its mouth, and then just, you know, that flower being used by Meowscarda works really well. You can tell it's kind of got like that dark thief look to it, to a certain degree, or like, I guess, like a dark magician type look to it. I don't know exactly how you guys like to see Floragato, but it just seems to work perfectly for me. I have no issues with this Pokemon. I think it's a really good Pokemon. It's barely going to end up beating out Croconaw for me. Wow, I was going to say Crocalor. Different. We just talked about it. So Croconaw for me. But Floragato, really solid here in the A tier. I'm not putting it up over Prinplup or the rest of them, but a really cool looking Pokemon, and I think a solid middle evolution, which leaves us with our very last one, the Quaxley line. The maligned, the often disliked line of Quaxley to Quaxwell to Quaquaval, and I get it. This Pokemon was a big surprise to me. I thought that Quaxley's hat was like an Admiral hat, and I assumed that that would have ended up playing into the rest of these Pokemon, but what ended up happening is that was just its hair. It was like a pompadour type hair, right? And that played into what I think Quaxwell has, which is like a slicked back hair. It's got, you know, the almost, what are those called? It's like the Emperor Penguins, maybe, like those types of eyebrows. And, you know, if it wasn't in this very specific stance, you wouldn't know that it's going to turn into Quaquaval, which is a dance Pokemon, and even that just is not a great Pokemon. I don't know. I don't hate Quaxwell as much as everybody else does. It was a really great Pokemon to have in my run of Scarlet and Violet, but the design is just not great. It's very forgettable. I think once we get to like Gen 11 and 12, it's going to be one of the most forgotten about middle evolutions, which is a shame. It's not terrible, but it's not great. I am going to put it right above Drizzile, which I know is going to really, really tick off a lot of people, but it's not the worst one by any stretch, but it's definitely not the best, and it shouldn't be anywhere close to some of these other Pokemon. So that's gonna do it here. I know you guys probably are gonna flame the crap out of me. I'm fully ready for this one. I'm happy. It's interesting that, like, you know, grass Pokemon were the best and the worst one. You know, there seemed to be a lot of Pokemon kind of filtered through throughout. I hope it didn't feel like I was too high on certain Pokemon, and too low on certain types. Even this 1, 2, 3, these top 10, right? It looks like grass were the number 1 with 4, but then there was 3 for fire and 3 for water. So I'll be interested to see what you guys think. What changes would you make personally? What do you think that I missed with this? And again, you know, let me know if there's another tier list that you would like for me to make over here at the Game House. But I'll ask you once more to like and subscribe, but we're gonna wrap it up on this tier list. Thank you for watching, and with that, I will catch you on the next one.